Welcome back. You're listening to the Starzology Astrology podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about fashion and how it's changed over the years and how we can track this through astrology. So I'm here today with my good friend Arwynne O'Neill.
Hello, Alison. It's good to be back.
Oh, welcome. We're so happy you're here. And we're going to be looking into fashion and astrology.
Yes.
And so perhaps you'd just be able to start us off with where are we going to be starting with this?
Sure, certainly. I am going to be starting around the World War II era, actually. And the reason for that is, well, twofold. The first thing is I'm tracking the outer planets and how they correlate with fashion trends. And of course, the outer planets are what we call generational planets because they are so slow moving, especially Pluto and Neptune. Neptune spends about 12 years in each sign, and Pluto, of course, has an eccentric orbit, so it spends between 12 at the smallest and about 30 in each sign. So an average of 20, which is, of course, what makes a generation. So Pluto is really the big generational planet, what we call the baby boomers. That's Pluto in Leos. The Generation X is Pluto in Virgo and Libra because it spends less time in those. And then Pluto in Scorpio is the millennials. And of course, these Gen Z is Pluto in Sag and so on.
Okay.
Yeah. What we're actually doing is going through not just those generational planets, the Pluto and Neptune, but also Uranus, which moves every 7 years. And that's really when we see big changes in fashion is approximately like every 7 years. If you look over the last 100 years, you'll really see these big 7-year sort of gaps of going from the Mad Men look to the hippie look in the 60s, for example. These are really crisply correlated with the changes of the planet Uranus.
Okay. So are you actually saying that Uranus is spending 7 years in a different sign? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, in 1943, for example, which is where I'm going to be starting
We're going to be starting, yeah.
Yeah, 1943, Pluto was in Leo, Neptune was in Libra, and Uranus was in Gemini. And if anyone is aware of where the planets are currently, right now we've got Uranus in Taurus. So that really covers the whole zodiac for Uranus placements, which is
amazing.
A nice way of sort of rounding it out. And that's it's not quite 100 years, but yeah.
But it's 12 signs.
12 signs, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So 1943, we were in World War II. And of course, let's just preface this with we're speaking from a North American perspective, a Canadian perspective. We can't speak for the entire world's cultures, but
yes.
But these are fashion trends, and they do get more and more universal. So what may start out as a very sort of North American perspective in the 40s, now 80 years later, fashions are very universal. Not every single country in the world dresses the same, obviously, but now with the internet, trends are very universal. And that also is reflected in the signs that those outer planets are passing through. We've gone through like a transpersonal sort of era in the last 20 years, which is, we'll get to that. So in 1943, we have Pluto in Leo, and Neptune in Libra. And these are the two outermost planets, the slowest moving planets. And I think of Leo and Libra as sort of like the king and the queen of the zodiac almost. We've got the king of the jungle, Leo. This is very sort of bold, outgoing, aggressive, masculine sort of sign. Yeah. And we've got Libra, which is the most feminine of all the signs. It's ruled by Venus, and it's the sign of love and beauty and symmetry and balance and all these things. So we've got very strict gender roles in the 1940s, male and female. And we have World War II, all the men going off to war, and the women are going into the workforce, into the factories. We've got Rosie the Riveter. For the first time, really, in modern history, all of a sudden we've got unisex fashion in a way. We've got suits on both men and women. We've got uniforms on both men and women. And this, I think, is very much described by Uranus in Gemini. Gemini being the sign of the twins. It's one of the sort of more gender fluid sort of signs. And we see big sort of shoulder pads and military look on both men and women. Everyone in kind of more practical, stripped down clothing that has fewer details because of the rationing, and more practical fabrics. Clothing had to last longer because of the war effort. All of the money was being spent to, to wage war on weapons, etc. And fashion was very much pushed to the side. Even movie stars of the era, if you look at the gowns that they wore, we had very simple, clean lines, not a lot of fabric, not a lot of details. And this was the asceticism of that era. And I see that as very emblematic of Gemini. the simplicity, but also the very, the elegance. So we have female movie stars now wearing pants for the first time. Katharine Hepburn.
Yes.
We've got Joan Crawford, very, masculine femininity, very sort of clean lines, and Lorraine Bacall, Humphrey Bogart, these kind of smart, clever, quick-talking Clark Gable type movie stars. And that quick-witted thing is a very Gemini thing. And even the romantic comedies back then, it was all about the banter, the quick talk between the movie stars. So that's a Gemini thing, I feel. And very much reflected in also just the layperson's fashions, not just the movie stars. Yeah, so that's Uranus and Gemini. And that was from 1943 to roughly now, 48. There are, of course, retrograde periods and whatnot, but we're just going to go with the sort of broad strokes.
Lovely.
These years. So the next big change is around 1949 when Uranus moves into Cancer. And what happens then? Well, the war's over. Everyone's come home. The troops have come home. We've got the GI Bill. They're building up suburbs. And now we've got this conspicuous consumption and the homemaker look, this sort of Donna Reed look with these beautiful kitchens and go shopping and make your home in the suburbs and raise your family, and the sort of father knows best style. So it went from Rosie the Riveter to like father knows best. And
everyone's wearing an apron, aren't they?
Everyone's wearing an apron, yes. This motherly sort of like home is the home is the castle, right? So the Pluto's still in Leo, so it's the king still. But now he's got this Doris Day, Grace Kelly kind of wife at home. She's making the home. He's going to work every day or whatever and coming back. And so he's got this sort of flamboyant style now on his days off. He gets to wear these Hawaiian shirts or whatever, like bright, bold ties. We're seeing a lot of this in like the early 50s, right? So if you go back to any kind of catalogs or TV shows of the early 50s, even in black and white, you can tell that there's a lot going on the guy's days off, right? Mm-hmm. And the women of the day too. I mean, this Cancerian ideal with this very womanly figure now comes into vogue. Like we're not the Katharine Hepburns of yesterday and the Gemini sort of style have been overtaken by Elizabeth Taylor look, Marilyn Monroe, as I said, Doris Day, Judy Garland. So we've got the perfect wife, but we've also got this beautiful, voluptuous, very womanly sort of look that comes into style. So one of the things that I think is really emblematic of the shift into Cancer, with Uranus going into Cancer in 1948-49, is we got Christian Dior's new look. And this was the absolute turnaround from war is over, rationing is over, we're using 10 yards of fabric to make a dress now. Conspicuous consumption at its peak. And these dresses, if you just Google Christian Dior's new look, 1948, you will see what I'm talking about. It was massive skirts, massive, like using as much fabric as you can. And imagine back then they didn't have performance fabrics. We're talking cotton, wool, linen. These are heavy, big skirts, big dresses. Like you are not doing a lot of running around in these things. You're like the quintessential decoration on top of the cake in these things. But yet, half the commercials had these women in these dresses in the kitchen. So one really wonders how much cooking and cleaning was going on in these amazing gowns. But yes, so this is what I think is emblematic of Uranus in Cancer, while still having Pluto in Leo and Neptune in Libra. And of course, on the male side, we've got the big stars of the era: Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne. Very much like icons of like masculinity,
men's
right?
Men.
Yeah, men's men. And we've got the women's women: Doris Day, Grace Kelly, Elizabeth Taylor, Marilyn Monroe. And floral prints became huge at this time. Big floral prints, Hawaiian prints. Yeah, and bright colors and really flamboyant attire on both male and female side. That takes us through 1955, approximately.
Okay.
Yeah. 1955, Uranus moves into Leo. And then we have the late 50s. You can look at any movies by Hitchcock, the color films that he did, a lot of Jimmy Stewart, a lot of Cary Grant, and this really continues. I mean, they look back on the 50s as like the kind of the golden age of when men were men and women were women, right? Yes. And this is really emblematic of, I think, the outer planets in Leo, and really reinforcing Pluto in Leo. It was the atomic age, right? Mm-hmm. So we had bikinis, Bikini Atoll, the bomb, all of this. And it's funny to me that, not funny, haha, but funny, interesting, that in the era of the atom bomb, it's like that harnesses the power of the sun, right? And we've got two of the outer planets in Leo, ruled by the sun, which is, it really reflected in fashion, which is why it's interesting in this talk. But it's, yeah. So we also have, if you want to picture what this kind of era was like, Mad Men. It's absolutely the first 2 seasons of Mad Men.
Okay.
Anything that went on in those first 2 seasons of Mad Men is exactly this era that we're talking about. If we want to talk about Leo, another thing that we have to talk about is hair. Because this was an era of big hair, big hairstyles, very styled hair, very sculptural hair on both men and women. And women spending all this time at roller sets. Remember Grease? Grease came out in the 70s, but it was about the 50s.
Yes.
And if you remember the beauty school dropout scene with those big formations of hot rollers, this is Outer Planets in Leo. This is Leo in fashion, like immortalized,
A shampoo and set, I think my mother used to call
right?
it.
There you go. Exactly. Bouffants, the
Yes.
flip, the giant Flintstones hair. Yeah, all of that stuff is very much, I think, Uranus in Leo. And also Jackie Kennedy was
Right.
she was Leo with Scorpio rising.
Right.
So yeah, it's
Got the big shades.
yeah, and also Marilyn Monroe was a Gemini with Leo rising.
Oh.
So those 2 symbols of this era
Of that era,
both had
absolutely.
very prominent Leo placements. And let's not just be totally North America centric. A couple of the other big stars of this era were Sophia Loren and Brigitte Bardot. Also,
But again, it's the
giant
same.
hair. I mean, you could really just caricaturize these women
Yes.
by just doing a little squiggle of their hairstyle, and you would immediately, what someone of our generation at least would be like, oh yeah, I know who that is.
Yeah.
It's the hairstyle, the beauty mark, and you're set. So in 1962, a couple of things happened. We have Pluto moving into Virgo. We have now Neptune in Scorpio, and we have Uranus moving into Virgo. So Neptune moved a little earlier, actually. Pluto actually moved into Virgo earlier as well.
Okay.
Regardless.
Yeah.
This is
There's
Pluto.
an overall shift,
Yeah, there's a shift that's slowly over the late 50s. So from 1956 to 62, we have all of the major planets moving into different signs. Pluto in Virgo really had a huge effect on mainly women. I mean, the birth control pill.
Yes.
There were huge innovations in women in the workforce. This is the beginning of the equal rights movement and women really taking more of a role in society, whereas they had spent sort of the post-war era in the, so to speak, in the kitchen. And
Yes.
not all women, obviously, but this is the sort
In
of
general, yes.
the image that we have is like, the homemakers and we're at work and blah, 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 father comes home. So really, this is women taking a more active role, I see as very much of a Pluto in Virgo thing, because women, of course, are Virgo rules women's issues and all this. And then we have Neptune moving into Scorpio, which definitely the 60s were divided clearly from the early Mad Men era to what happened in the late 60s, which is the protests and the anti-war movements and the hippies and all of this stuff that very much revolutionary, which is very Scorpio.
Sergeant Pepper's and that.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, exactly. You could really just do this with the Beatles if you wanted. But we'll get into that. Also, Uranus moves into Virgo. And this is interesting to me because one of the things, if you look at the late 50s to early 60s, is these little matching pillbox hats and purses and gloves and little Chanel suits. And what could be more Virgo than a little perfectly matching little suit that you can wear to work?
Like
and
air hostesses.
Yes, air hostess, perfect example, exactly. And the little gloves, and my great-grandmother.
Gloves, yes.
My great-grandmother, any pictures of her, there's this boxy little suit, and she was a teacher. She was like 4'9", and she taught school her entire life, and she never was outside without a hat and matching gloves and a little handbag.
Correct.
And just, and she was a Virgo, of course. But yeah, that's the Chanel suits, the geometric block sets of like, the sort of
The
mod,
color block, yeah.
the mod outfits and
The mini skirt.
this is late 60s. So
Okay.
mini skirts I see as very much a Virgo thing because it's mini,
Okay.
but also Neptune and Scorpio because now we're getting into
Right.
the sex thing, right?
Yes,
Now we're getting
yes.
into the sexual revolution. The pill has happened. Women are becoming liberated, and with that comes all of the other stuff. And then of course like gay rights and there's that whole thing. And beginning in the late 60s, you have sort of really the first multicultural movements since like the 20s when North Americans and British tourists were kind of, I don't want to say taking on other cultures, but like, so
Embracing
exactly. It wasn't like an appropriation thing. It was, like, let's actually, oh, wow, there are other cultures that exist. And, all of a sudden you're wearing African prints, or you're wearing sort of like fringed Native American inspired jackets and leather fringe and stuff like that. Women wearing like braids, women of all different races wearing braids in their hair. And of course, I mean, obviously the Black Panthers in the late 60s, huge influence, revolutionaries like Che Guevara and Castro, and becoming sort of fashion icons in a weird way. And that's very much Neptune and Scorpio. It's like kind of appropriating these cultural icons in a fashion sort of
into the
thing.
Fashion world, yeah.
Exactly. So Uranus and Virgo, I'm seeing fashion splintering into a lot of different factions at this point as well. So we have musical tastes really influencing fashion at this point. So we have sort of a mod look, we have sort of a rockabilly look, we have hippies, we have the beat poets with, they're all black, very much Neptune and Scorpio there. Obviously, there's a conservative sort of movement going on the side, the moral majority, so to speak. But we're talking really about the subcultures that sort of influence fashion.
Yes,
this isn't about what everyone was wearing on the street necessarily, but this is about what the era is remembered for.
But this is what Uranus does, isn't it?
Yeah.
It brings in the change and the revolutionary.
Exactly. Right. And those things sort of trickle down or up, as the case may be. Yeah. So just to recap the years here, we're going from now 1962 to 70, roughly. And this is when Pluto is in Virgo, Neptune's in Scorpio, and Uranus is in Virgo. And just to sort of a recap on this, we've got now going to the late 60s. Hair remained pretty high maintenance through this time, but it really went through a lot of different types of styles. So we still had really big helmet hair, but we also had long braids. We had ironed straight hair. A lot of women who had naturally curly hair ironed it straight. Think Marsha Brady, think Cher.
Yes.
She
ironed it with an iron.
I mean, my grandmother did this. She used to tell me that. And I wanted curly hair all my life, and my hair was naturally straight, and I was just like horrified that she said she used to iron her hair. I'm like, why? Your hair is naturally curly. Why would anyone do that? But I was raised in the 80s when everyone permed their hair. But anyways, like, I digress.
Yeah.
So now we have really iconic hair at this point too. We have like Jane Fonda shag, which is also like a sort of more practical sort of short look. We have polyester making a huge splash, which is like both practical in the wash and wear.
Trampoline.
Right? The wash and wear thing. What could be more Virgo than you don't have to iron this? You can just crumple it up into a bag and shake it out and go. We have go-go boots and mini skirts, which is, I think, Neptune and Scorpio, the sex aspect of it. We have paisleys, where floral prints, flower power. What could be more Virgo than flower power? We have turtlenecks and hand-beaded jewelry, and all these motifs coming in from other cultures. We have animal prints, the sort of psychedelic prints, and Pucci, tie-dye, geometric and mind-expanding patterns to go with the mind-expanding drugs that were in the subculture at this point. We also have sort of a retro-Victorianism, which is also very Virgo, I think, going back to sort of an interesting buttoned-up sort of look and sort of browns and golds and earth tones that come into the late 60s and into the 70s. So this is all the influence of Virgo.
That was it. Burnt orange was everywhere.
Oh my God, burnt orange, avocado fridges, like harvest gold. Yeah.
Basins.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And on men, let's not forget, we've got men are suddenly growing their hair longer. We've got experimentation with sideburns and sort of these shaggy sort of hairstyles on men who were, it's like the first time they've been allowed to have hair longer than military crew cut style since the
war. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And to wear turtlenecks under their suits for a change and Nehru colors. Oh my God. So, yes, we've got Scorpio definitely influencing the decade as well. We've got the beatniks, the Black Panthers, revolutionary chic, as I was saying. And that continues through the 70s. So now we've got 1971. A few things happen. We've got Pluto moving into Libra. We've got Neptune moving into Sagittarius. And we've got Uranus also moving into Libra until 1974. So the early 70s. And then in 74, we've got Uranus moving into Scorpio, where it will stay until 1982. So this is going to be
a blend.
Yeah, so 71 to 83, let's say. After the Civil Rights Act in 1968, there's growing awareness of struggles for national independence around the world. And this really brings in a multiculturalism, as I was saying, for the first time since like probably the 1920s into North America. We've got really amazing African-American icons like Angela Davis and all these wonderful sort of blaxploitation movies that are bringing in sort of Black Panther style into the mainstream. There's articles in the New York Times and all these things like terrifying, like all the sort of middle Americans about like, oh my God, what's happening with the...
It is a revolution. Yes.
Right, exactly. So, but fashion takes its influence from the extremes.
Exactly.
And this is where it was in Neptune and Scorpio, and then into Sagittarius, which of course rules foreign lands, higher education, adventure, and travel. So this is where we're getting this whole multicultural influence feel. And also I see Sagittarius as really influencing this, men having more facial hair, more hair in general. Sagittarius is sort of this loosening up of the sort of rigid, I see a Sagittarian icon as like Jim Morrison, for example, and also Jimi Hendrix.
Yes.
So we got like these sort of Dionysian male icons now.
That's right.
And trickling down to every man on the street having just a little bit more facial hair, a little more hair to play with. We also see beginning in these Libra-influenced era, we have a real sort of blending of the sexes and sort of gender bending in earnest. We have stars like David Bowie and Grace Jones really blurring the lines of gender and what's attractive and what sort of is considered like what's the word, asexuality or sort of pansexuality for the time. I mean, they bent gender back then. I think now, it's broken completely. It's splintered into like a million pieces. But back then it was like David Bowie, oh my God, he's wearing eyeshadow. What's going on? And we also see fashion becoming very unisex. We have men's and women's pantsuits, leisure suits, sort of these... The leisure suits. So we have these interesting sort of soft, stretchy fabrics. We have velour and corduroy and sort of these neat stretchy sweater dresses on women. Like if you
pinafore things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And of course, men being able to wear turtlenecks and these kinds of things. Interesting patterns as well that are bringing in sort of this sort of Sagittarian multicultural thing like plaids and paisleys and stuff like that. Okay, so in 1983, moving right along, we have Pluto still in Scorpio, and we have Neptune moving into Capricorn and Uranus moving into Sagittarius. And this is the beginnings of very Reagan-Thatcher conservative sort of thing. Okay. So I see Neptune, and I didn't necessarily go deeply into this before, but Neptune really is very much about image, about your film, your music, your sort of cultural, creative aspects. And it rules film in a couple of different senses. Obviously, photography, the medium of chemicals, and all these things. But it also definitely rules like how we see ourselves and the image we project and the sort of facade and the sort of Neptunian, I don't know, the glow of like an
man
image.
In the mirror almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How we present.
Exactly. So Uranus is really like a sort of more technical. It's like the innovation and why something becomes like there was scarcity, there was rationing. So we have that is like a technical aspect of like what rules a change in fashion. But Neptune is really like what we idealize. And so in these different 7-year periods, Neptune is always really the first thing you want to look at because that's sort of like the style guide of the era, and Uranus is sort of like the way it actually kind of goes down to the bottom line,
it's
and
the
then
streets,
and then Pluto is the society aspect, like why we've got Pluto in Scorpio in the early 80s, and it's the greed is good era, right? There's a lot of darkness in this era. We got the beginnings of the AIDS crisis. It's really interesting about the AIDS crisis. It absolutely mirrors like when Pluto was in Scorpio to a T. I mean, Pluto was in Scorpio from 1984 to 1995, which was the year that they first synthesized AZT and it became widely available. And if you look at the spike of AIDS deaths in North America, it is 100% a peak right in that Pluto and Scorpio.
That's right.
That's right when it happened.
Yeah.
And everything before and after that is minimal.
Yeah.
Which is really just an amazing.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, and the slogans for the AIDS crisis: silence equals death, sex equals death. What could be more Scorpio than that?
That's right. Well, even in Africa, it was huge.
Yeah.
It was unspoken, but it was huge.
Yeah. Yeah, and the fashion of the 80s. I mean, we've got the goth style. We've got the heavy metal style where it's just like all these chains and the black leather and the spikes and the mohawks and all the stuff. Scorpio, but we've also got Neptune in Capricorn. So it's another era of conspicuous consumption. Greed is good. Gordon Gekko. We've got right. Wall Street going crazy.
Material girl.
Right. Material girl. Exactly. And the Young Republicans and all of the shows on TV, like Alex P. Keaton on Family Ties, like Michael J. Fox.
Yes.
It's like this young Republican of the child of hippie parents who are just horrified that this young Republican like kid, and power dressing for men and women, the shoulder pads. Oh my God, the power suits on both men and women. The colors of the era are even like scorpionic, with black and red. Like, when was black and red ever a color combination? But everyone from like Grace Jones to Michael Jackson Thriller to Princess Diana, huge advocate of like black and red as a color combination.
I know.
And Neptune in Capricorn is all about the power dressing thing. And then, of course, Uranus in Sagittarius from 1983 to 88. This is also bringing in the rap style at the time.
Okay.
So we've got multiculturalism, we've got, all these different sort of...
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. And that is a very good way to describe the 80s. A lot. Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah. It's very extra, as we say.
Mm-hmm. I seem to recall wearing platform shoes that I couldn't even walk in.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So just to wrap up about this era of the 80s here, obviously we have status consciousness of Capricorn, we have the multicultural, eclectic influence of Sagittarius, all under the umbrella of Pluto in Scorpio. So if you Google 80s fashion, you will see page after page of regrettable excess.
Yes.
Day-glow neon, pastels, ashen wash denim, distressed leather in every color of the rainbow with studs, fringe, quilting, rhinestones, paint spatters, appliques, and patch pockets. And that's just how the establishment was dressing. If you switch over to MTV, you will see that perms were apparently mandatory.
Everyone got a perm.
There was something called mousse that everyone apparently had to use, and it was handed out in massive vats, and it helped the hair be bigger and crispier and flammable, unfortunately. Fabrics in every color, tons of fabrics, tons of earrings, tons of scarves, headbands, necklaces, plastic bracelets, vests, puffy shirts, baggy pants, leg warmers, for God's sake.
Leg warmers.
Increasing complexity in...
The Bay City Rollers.
Yes. I mean, just Google any band in the 80s and just look in horror at the bigness of the hair and the bigness of the clothes and the complexity of the clothes. And yes, but yet I did grow up in the 80s as a child, and it was an amazing time to grow up because we had Madonna and Cyndi Lauper, and they were like, yes, you can wear every piece of clothing you have at once, and it's kind of amazing. Yeah. Anyway, so moving on to 1989. So from 1989 to 98, this is now Uranus joins Neptune in Capricorn. So we have Pluto still in Scorpio, and we have now Neptune and Uranus both in Capricorn. And this is the beginning of the backlash. So we have grunge now coming out.
Oh, yes.
We have the waifs, the backlash against these big supermodels with the big hair and all this stuff. And now it's suddenly Kate Moss is walking down the runway looking like a skeleton, wearing a tiny slip dress, and everyone's on heroin. And heroin chic was the thing. We have the grunge music, which is the reaction against the big hair and the big glam rock. And this is Capricorn going, no, let's take this a little more seriously, folks. And we have the runway is now showing grunge, and we have like sack dresses and flannel shirts tied around the waists of supermodels who weigh like 90 pounds. And this is Amber Valletta, Kate Moss, Linda Evangelista, these types of models.
Right.
Reaction against the Cindy Crawford.
But it was easy to wear.
Yeah, exactly. And now there's a renaissance of it. And I liked grunge. It was great. I lived in Seattle in the time, and grunge is awesome. So yeah, that's Capricorn for you. And also we still had, of course, it was still the late 80s and 90s, very prosperous time. This is not a time of actual scarcity. So we had businessmen and women wearing whatever top of the line. I mean, and even grunge, obviously.
Designer grunge.
Exactly. So yeah, that says it all right there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So these time frames, of course, I am rounding up and down. And
Sure.
anyone who's actually an astrologer or following along with their ephemeris and going, wait a minute, that happened in 95, not 96. Okay. Yes. These, I'm rounding up and down. So just a little disclaimer there. Moving on to 1996, we have Pluto moving into Sagittarius, we have Neptune moving into Aquarius, and we have Uranus moving into Aquarius. So this is all very different from the late 90s. Now we suddenly have Spice Girls, we have boy bands, we have ravers, we have retro hippies and metrosexuals. So now everything is very Aquarian and sort of unisex in a very different way. Everyone doesn't just want to be unisex, they all want to be pretty and shiny. And we have big fluffy furry coats and clothes, and everyone's tweezing and plucking and waxing everything, and there's lots of lip gloss and little half shirts and really, really low jeans, and we have something called velour, which is happening. Yeah, and we have lots of platform shoes, which is awesome. I'm never going to diss the platform shoes. We have lots of shiny fabrics, lots of feathery fake fur, and this is very much like the turn of the millennium. So we also have, this is an interesting turning point with Neptune in Aquarius. We have the tech boom. We have like the beginning of the internet. All of this stuff is happening right now.
Right.
And so there's a whole technology aspect that is kind of coming in. So we have a very sci-fi looking kind of shift all of a sudden, and which is great compared to acid wash. This is awesome. Yeah, and there were a lot of really pretty. I mean, Lenny Kravitz, like we have, and the Spice Girls, obviously, a lot of beautiful, like multicultural, like big hair, colorful and shiny. Yeah, exactly.
And it does seem to be interesting too that as the time moves on, that new fabrics are being created.
Yeah.
That are then being implemented during these periods when Uranus is in different signs.
That is absolutely, and of course Uranus rules innovation, and this is one of the driving forces of fashion. Is not just the ideal and the Neptune side of it, but the actual textiles, the technology.
Yes.
What makes something wearable? Like back in the 1940s, nylon stockings were invented. I think it was late 30s.
Yeah.
And before that, you had like silk stockings, which were not stretchy, and you
didn't give.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a revolution, really.
Yeah.
And when they ran out of them, women drew seams up the backs of their legs to fake wearing stockings, because it was such a style that you just wouldn't go out without stockings.
That's right.
I mean, my grandmother knew women who did this. It's not it's not a myth.
I know.
Yeah. So technology definitely runs a lot of what happens in fashion.
I think this is interesting because as the Crimpolino, whatever, that's what we used to call it, you can't get that anymore. I mean, it doesn't breathe. But it was because you didn't need to iron it.
Yeah.
It was revolutionary at the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 2004 to 2011 is our next period, and now we've still got Pluto in Sagittarius. We've got Neptune in Aquarius, and this is the sort of unisex, the metrosexual, that whole thing, and new sort of technological fabrics and influencing there. And then we've got Uranus moving into Pisces around 2004. And this is an era of, I want to say, there was retro everything. Because before, if you look back to the whole 20th century, you could really discern every decade, and you could say, okay, that's
by the fashion,
an early 60s look, and you kind of picture it and you know, like, oh, that's Mad Men, whatever.
Yeah.
And late 60s, like hippies, Woodstock.
Yeah.
70s, you picture certain,
Outdoor
obviously.
or something.
Yeah, exactly. And now 2004, that all kind of breaks down. Like, what does a 2004 look? I mean, you can kind of go back, you know, in your mind, you think, oh, okay, maybe there were like juicy couture, like sweatpants suit with like a little midriff showing thing and blah, blah, blah. But you wouldn't really be weirded out if you saw someone on the street wearing that now. But yet, you know, it's nearly 20 years later. And that was never the case in the 20th century. If you saw someone walking down the street wearing something from 20 years earlier, you would have been like, what is happening? Are they going to a costume thing?
Yes.
If you saw someone that was 20 years later, you would think they were a time traveler. And nowadays, you could see someone walking down the street wearing anything from pretty much anywhere from like the 1930s forward and not think it was weird. You might wonder if they were dressed as like a full like 1930s Dick Tracy gangster, but it really wouldn't be that odd. And I think that that is very much to do with the fact that we're now seeing all the outer planets in the transpersonal signs. Sagittarius, Aquarius, Pisces, the late zodiac.
Yes.
And this is happening in now the beginning of the aughts, as they say, the 2004 to 2011, the first real decade of the 21st century. Everything comes back around. All of the styles get recycled. And this is now, I think, because Uranus is in Pisces, and it's just like, let's revisit everything that's happened in the last 100 years. So we've got Ren Fair Victorian styles. We've got steampunk. We've got, and we've got recycling of 70s, 80s, 90s styles, everything, everywhere, all at once, as they say, And we've got the sort of mid-century square, like 1950s style thing happening. We've got Mad Men on TV, and everyone's going, oh my God, Mad Men, and dressing like Mad Men. We've got people starting to make their own clothes, and people going to 80s retro parties and dressing like gangster rappers. And, and then we've also got the tech boom, and everyone's now like dressing very casually to the office. So we've got something called nerdcore, something called normcore, and people wearing yoga gear to work, And this is all starting around the mid 2000s. And
is this the athleisure?
Yes.
Which is such a difficult word to say.
It is, and it's sometimes difficult to look at, but at the same time, who does it? Who's not guilty of it?
Who's not wearing yoga pants? Yes.
And of course, we're recording this in Vancouver, the home of Lululemon. A couple of years ago, Vancouver showed up on one of the worst dressed cities in the world.
No.
It did. It was right up there with Honolulu because, and really, who's making this list? Honolulu, they dress amazing. Who can complain about Hawaiian prints? But yeah, it was all about Lululemon and yoga pants everywhere.
Yoga pants everywhere.
Are we being cursed because we...
No,
silly.
People
are jealous, that's all.
Yeah, it's not a trend that's dying, I don't think, at all.
Which means, is it a trend even if it's,
there
it's
you
not
go.
going anywhere?
It's now a staple. It's like Star Trek outfits.
Right?
Yeah.
So 2011 to 2018 is our next period. And we've got still Pluto in Capricorn, and we've got Neptune entering Pisces and Uranus entering Aries. So we still have this focus with Pluto and Capricorn on practicality, on status brands. Like there's never been a decrease in the fashion industry as a whole, as a money generating force in the world. This is just continued and continued and continued. And while Pluto was in Capricorn, obviously Pluto is the generational one, and Capricorn is about money and industry and systems and all these things. So we've got watches are getting just so expensive you can't even imagine, and handbags are like...
What is it with handbags? Yeah.
I honestly don't get it. But yeah, handbags. The expensive handbag craze, blame Pluto and Capricorn.
Yeah.
They rival the cost of housing at some points in the 2000s. And sneakers getting more and more like vastly, crazily expensive. So that's all Pluto and Capricorn. But we've also got this sort of, on the other hand, Neptune in Pisces, which idealizes comfort and unisex and the recycling of trends and all these different sort of comfort textiles and dry weave fabrics, and you no longer have to worry about sweating and being uncomfortable, and you can now have and a huge focus on shoes. Pisces rules the feet, right? And we've got Neptune and Pisces, the rise of Sex in the City and these like crazy expensive shoes for women and crazy expensive shoes for men. Yeah, like I really see that as a Neptune and Pisces thing. It's like this fixation on insanely expensive shoes. On all the spectrums, like the crazy expensive athletic shoes, which are super comfortable and they can support any type of activity. And you've got one for like every different type of thing. You've got the hiking shoes, you've got the water shoes, you've got the running shoes, CrossFit, and all the just go to Foot Locker or Sport Check and say like, this is my weird little niche sport, and where's the shoe for that? Oh, it's over here, and there's like an aisle for each one. And then of course women's shoes in the
general.
So there's that. And then we've got Uranus going into Aries, which is definitely the ubiquity of activewear and performance fabrics. And this technology where everything now is like the wearable tech and the technical fabrics.
Is this like Patagonia and...
Yeah, absolutely. But also the fact that now everything has like sort of like compartments where you can,
little zip pockets.
Yeah, for your phone, because this is the like
zips under your
all of that.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're doing things with our hands that you in the podcast listening world can't see, but you know what we mean.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think when back in the day, like 10 years ago, we had a podcast episode about this once where we talked about what was the future. And this is maybe 2013 when we were talking. So we were like envisioning
10 years ago.
I believe that one of the things that we had sort of predicted / envisioned was the Mila Jovovich from Resident Evil, this sort of Aries sort of icon of functionality and like this sort of live assassin who has like a pocket for everything and all these different weapons, and she's like half machine, half woman, and that being like this kind of like Uranus and Aries ideal of like
the third element.
Yeah, exactly, the fifth element, but exactly all of her movies same. Yeah, there's just this functionality and precision and aggressive. Yeah, it's sort of a streamlined warrior for the
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like this business of having a pocket everywhere, and you've got your back pockets here and this and that. It's so clever. I think it's just so clever.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
And in 2018, we've got Uranus going into Taurus. It'll be there until 2026. And what this brought in, I believe, is the revolution in sort of like realizing what a wasteful industry fashion is, second to only to the oil industry and coal and that kind of extraction. It's the most wasteful of the industries in the world. So now we've got a rise of like slow fashion, as they say, and thrifting, vintage, natural fabrics, dyes. A lot of stores will tell you that they're naturally sourced this and that, and artisanal sort of stuff, and people shopping on Etsy or whatever instead of just going to the major
fast fashion.
Yeah, exactly. The reverse of the sort of the backlash to that. And there's still the fast fashion, obviously, but this is sort of like a backlash and a bit of a reaction against that, sort of a political movement in the opposite direction, and an awareness of the waste. And of course, it's just like any other thing where you become aware of it. But it's not like you can really. I mean, yes, we recycle, but is it making a dent? And there's a gyre of plastic in the oceans, and fashion is not going to be less wasteful, but more aware humans can kind of know that.
I agree.
Yeah.
And even in the area where, because I do crafting with wool and yarns, and before I just get synthetic and think nothing of it.
Right.
Now, I'm buying locally sourced
there you go.
from the sheep farm 100 kilometers down the road, rather than something from who knows where.
Uranus and Taurus, exactly.
Yeah, and I feel better about it. And it's not cheaper.
Yeah.
But I feel better about it, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yep, exactly. So continuing on 2023, obviously, this is the year we're in. We've got Pluto moving into Aquarius, and we've talked about this a lot, but what I see is that it does obviously affect fashion. And one of the things that continues to happen is the innovations in wearable tech, customization, sort of small batch, 3D printing, ordering your own whatever, like anything that you can kind of imagine. Oh, hey, I used to have this, whatever. And you can find it on eBay or some other site, or find it used on in some either actual thrift store or online thrift store or eBay, where they have remade the thing that you used to wear when you were like 10 and you loved the thing. And so it's like a personalization of fashion. And subcultures have fragmented into not only just fandoms, which is something that I'll talk about in a second, but there's this sort of blurring of fantasy and reality where you can kind of create your own fashion, not just in the sense of like wearing what you want, but like you can find people who are whatever you idealize fashion-wise. And so this is like the Ren Fair thing or the steampunk thing. There are entire festivals of steampunk.
Yes.
There are zombie walks where if your thing is like,
cosplay.
Cosplay. Oh my God, exactly. Like furries or whatever, Comic-Con. And some people, it's Comic-Con every day. And the festival scene people who make their own clothes for these amazing music festivals. And it's like, that's their whole life. It's not just like I just do this in the summer or once a year or whatever. You can live that all year, all the time. And you'll find your own tribe.
Yes.
Find your own tribe. That's really Pluto and Aquarius. It's the era of find your own tribe. But we also, to continue on that, have Neptune moving into Aries in 2025.
Okay.
And this is really interesting to me because we've seen, obviously with Neptune in Pisces, the recycling of all these different past eras. And what I see in Neptune moving into Aries, and these are slow moving, blah, blah, blah. So there's a bit of overlap all the time. But Aries is obviously about radical individualism. And we already had Uranus in Aries. So we've got a prequel of that, a preview of that. But I'm gonna say that Neptune is just gonna amplify that exponentially. So when Neptune goes into Aries in 2025, we will have absolutely much more of this radical individualism, much more focus on sportswear, activewear, subcultures, fandoms, as you say, creating your personal brand. Remote work is going to continue to allow people to bring their whole self to work, be their whole self all the time. And that does mean expect more kids wearing unicorn and princess costumes to the grocery store or to school.
Yeah.
Adults wearing, superhero costumes on the streets.
You see it.
Yes.
They've got the Cinderella skirts on and whatnot.
Absolutely. We were watching a bunch of kids learning how to ride bikes at one of the parks recently, and half the kids had like these crazy awesome helmets, like little Godzilla helmets with like little horns and little rabbit ears. And there are people who ride motorcycles in Vancouver with massive rabbit heads on, which is cool, but like that's them
Individuality
all the time. Yeah, they're not in a parade. That's just I'm wearing a bunny head all the time. Yeah. Panda head, whatever. Yeah. And I actually have a friend who has 2 teenagers, and we were talking the other day. She said, yeah, all the kids just wear pajamas to school now. I was like, what? Really? Yeah. It started with Uranus and Aries, and it's going to just absolutely continue and amplify with Neptune and Aries, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now, Arwynne, this has been great. You've gone through almost 100 years of fashion, showing how the different planetary shifts through the signs and their energies form backdrops, and we actually see it coming through society through these fashionable things that we're particularly talking about today.
Yeah.
And so what we're looking forward for in the few years ahead is going to be, are we saying more individuality, and we're welcoming that? Because I think it's great.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. I knew people who I worked with in the last 10 years who it was not such a distant memory to them when they had to, as women, wear stockings to work, had to wear like skirts, had to wear a jacket at all times. And yeah, those days are over.
When I started work, we were not allowed to wear trousers as a woman. You had to wear pantyhose.
Yeah, right.
And I can't believe it now when I look back.
Yeah. And now it's like, oh, you're not wearing your Spider-Man mask to work today.
I mean, no woman wears pantyhose anymore unless it's for going out at night.
Yeah. And if then, it's only because maybe it's really cold. Like otherwise, they'll just have bare legs and like some self-tanner or something. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not to say that you can't, because my God, like the technology in stockings has grown exponentially. So if you want to wear stockings, if you want to wear like any kind of fishnets in like that look like a crazy spider web or shattered glass or flowers, you can find that. You can find any color of any fabric of any type of thing that you want for any part of your body, or design it and have it made for you, which is incredible. It's really, it's a pretty neat time to be alive, for sure. And really, like what we're saying is just that it's a neat way to look at fashion trends, I think, through a lens of the outer planets. And obviously, if you are an astrologer, you would think Venus is the fashion planet. And for sure, like in your personal style, absolutely. I've got Venus in Libra, which probably, accounts for why I care about fashion, in some way.
Here today.
Yeah, because I mean, some people don't care about fashion, but everyone has to get dressed. As RuPaul said, we're all born naked. The rest is drag.
Well, there you have it.
There you have it. Yeah. So it's just a neat way of sort of like encapsulating these trends and looking at them in a systematic way and going, wow, that's really cool that there's all these correlations.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is great. I think this is also a conversation we can revisit maybe in 5 years' time when Uranus has then moved on into Gemini again, and we can certainly see what's developed behind and what we can anticipate for the future. I think it's great. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, Arwynne, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your knowledge about the fashion world through astrology.
Thank you so much for having me, Alison.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the 2 main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer or someone who's learning astrology or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.